Next, from Springfield, our one-on-one conversation with former Illinois Governor Dan Walker. Governor Walker recently authorized his autobiography entitled The Maverick and the Machine. In the book, Governor Walker recounts his rise to the top of the legal profession, his run for governor, fights with Mayor Richard J. Daley, and later, his serving time in a federal prison. Governor Walker is interviewed by our contributing correspondent, Bernard Saraki. This runs about 30 minutes.
Good evening. Welcome to the Illinois Channel. Our guest today is Governor Dan Walker, former governor of Illinois. Dan, thank you very much for being with us today.
Bernie, thank you for inviting me. I tell you, I feel like I'm at home again as soon as I got down here because I'm back in downstate.
This is, I was thinking about our chat today, and I was thinking, I remember that cold January day when you were inaugurated in 1973. And you used a phrase in your speech. You said, "The free ride is over." What did you mean by that?
I meant that I wanted to try to start the process of stopping pay-to-play government and politics in the state of Illinois. I tried to, and I said I was going to, stand tall on ethics in terms of state government, and I did. I issued a series of very tough executive orders, and I said I would in that speech in order to clean up and elevate the ethics standards of the state. And those orders, one of them said to the people under the governor, that's about 70,000 employees and the agencies under the governor, you shall not require a state employee to get out there and raise campaign contributions. You shall not do that. And it was enforced for 4 years. And when I left office, that order was rescinded, and no governor since then has had the guts to follow my lead in terms of saying, you shall not do these things.
One of the reasons for your visit to Springfield these days is your new book, The Maverick and the Machine, and
here it is.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Sure.
When did you become a maverick, or when did you realize that you were a maverick in the political arena?
Well, some who know me well say that I was born a maverick. My father was an East Texas character, a fiercely independent guy, and I had developed a strong sense of independence. Bernie, I don't like kowtowing to people, and I made up my mind a long time ago when I first came into this state and got interested in politics that I would never kowtow to the boss of the Chicago machine. And I watched governors before me do that. Democratic governors do that when they didn't have to do that, but they did. And I said, I will not kowtow to the mayor of the city of Chicago.
You're a graduate of the Naval Academy. When did you graduate from?
In the year 1945, I graduated from the Naval Academy. Well, that was one of my problems, Bernie, when I went to prison. The warden was a graduate of West Point. And I'll never forget the day when he saw me standing in the chow line, and he saw I was wearing a ring, and he came over to me and said, take it off. And I said, no. He said again, Walker, take off that ring. I said, no way. He said, get him. And so the guards surrounded me and pushed me down on the ground and stripped that ring off. Again, those were trying days. I was humiliated. I know what it's like to be told by a guard, okay, Walker, take off all your clothes and we'll search all cavities. Those are demeaning and humiliating things, and they happen not just to me, but to others also. And a lot of people have heard that phrase, country club prison, FedEx, that kind of thing. And I want to say to you, anybody who reads this book will never use that phrase again.
When you left the Naval Academy, you did some active duty then.
Yes, I was in the Navy actually for 10 years because I was enlisted for 3 years before I went to the Academy.
Okay. And then you went to law school afterwards, and
Yes. And then I was called back for Korea for another 2 years.
Where'd you go to law school at?
At Northwestern in Chicago.
And then you began practicing law in Chicago? Or?
Well, in between, I became law clerk to the Chief Justice of the United States, Fred Vinson. And I also worked as a Deputy Chief Commissioner of the United States Court of Military Appeals. And then I went back in the Navy for the time of Korea, and then I settled down and practiced law.
I want to ask you a little bit about the Walker Report.
Yes.
How were you approached to take part in what eventually became the Walker Report? How were you recommended, and what was your attitude towards that entire incident?
I was then president of the Chicago Crime Commission and a member of what you would call the business establishment in Chicago. And Lloyd Cutler, the executive director of the President's Commission on Violence, called me and asked me to assemble a team and do a report on what had actually happened out there on the streets in Chicago. And I had read some of it, not a lot about it, and so I had an open mind when I went into it. And I was predisposed, actually, somewhat in favor of law and order. But after we looked at the films and got first-hand reports, not newspaper reports, just first-hand reports from people on the scene about the absolutely terrible violence that was used, I had to and did come to the conclusion that a minority of policemen engaged in what could only be called a police riot. But it was a minority, and I said that very clearly. The majority of the policemen were fine. But the violence that occurred just could not be condoned. The name of the book was Rights in Conflict, the rights of people to demonstrate arrayed against the rights of law and order, a problem that is faced in demonstrations right down to this day.
What was the reaction of Mayor Daley to you personally at that?
He was very unhappy. I paid a courtesy call on him, well, not a courtesy call, a fact-gathering call on him during my study. And then, and he did not have much to offer. Actually, Bernie, Mayor Daley and I never really learned how to communicate with each other. We were worlds apart. I was a kid from California, an independent-minded cuss, and he didn't understand independent politics at all. He was totally wound up in organization politics. And so we just didn't communicate. And that's unfortunate, but that was a fact of life.
The period between the Walker Report's publication and your deciding to run for governor, what went on? What were you thinking about it? Did people come up to you immediately after the Walker Report and say, you know, you could be governor, this is excellent? How did that come about?
No. I had 7 children. One of them, my son Charles, has been with me on this book tour, and a wonderful son he is, and all of those children, and now I have 22 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. But I set about raising a family. And when you have 7 children and want to plan for college and all of that kind of thing, you don't have much time left over to do money to engage in politics, and you have to have enough to support the family if you're going to go out there and run for office. So I just could not get involved directly in running for office. But then I felt strongly. I worked on that commission to study state government, the Little Hoover Commission, after I got out of law school. That taught me something about state government. And I watched the governors. I finally came to the conclusion that only by being governor in this state could you change the rotten system. And so I decided that if I could ever get the opportunity to do so, I would. And when I became Vice President General Counsel of Montgomery Ward, at a decent enough salary, I was able to do it. I said, enough. I'm going to step out there and run for governor, and I did. And I wasn't encouraged to do so. Actually, people said, have you lost your mind running against the Daley machine? So, but I did it. And that's when I made the marvelous decision to walk the state. and meet the people of Illinois. And boy, did I meet them. I stayed every night with a different family. They were wonderful to me. I'll never forget it.
Whose idea was that to walk the state? That was, and probably one of the most effective political maneuvers in quite a few years in Illinois. It got everyone's attention, sometimes not as much attention, but it built and it built and it built. And everyone will remember that. They'll remember the bandana you have around your neck right now. Was that a staff idea, or did you kick it around one day and decide this? Hey, this will be an excellent. It will be an excellent thing to both meet the people in Illinois, but also the PR we get from this event.
Yes, that was exactly the conversation. Lawton Childs, a very wonderful United States Senator and Governor of the state of Florida, did it before me. And I talked with Lawton about it, and he said, Dan, it's a great way to meet the people of the state and learn at the same time. I mean, most guys who run for governor, they get out there and they get into an airplane and they fly around the state, they jump out and they hold a press conference and shake a few hands, they go to a county fair, and that's their idea of downstate. No governor before me has ever learned downstate as completely as I did. And it was the walk that did that. And it was the walk, more importantly, I think, that introduced me to the heart and soul of the people of this state. And also, gee, Bernie, I'll never forget, I was in a restaurant having breakfast at the end of the walk, and this waitress came over to me. And when I was getting up to go, she came over and she put her arm around me. And she said, honey, please take care of your feet. I know what it's like to be on your feet for hours, so please take care of your feet.
When you ran in the primary, you ran against Paul Simon,
yes,
a Southern Illinois Democrat,
yes,
a Democrat that had a fair amount of visibility in the Chicago area.
Yes.
I can recall as a young person watching Cups show, Irv Cups in it on Sunday night, and Paul Simon was on there.
Yes.
And so this was not an unknown, and you were not a Southern Illinois person. The machine was definitely, the Chicago organization was definitely not in your favor, and you won.
Yes.
You won. How do you tell me about winning? I mean, where did the votes come that put you in?
Downstate.
Downstate.
Downstate. And now, sure, Chicago, because a Democrat cannot win in the state of Illinois without having a strong vote up there in the city of Chicago. But it was that independence, that streak of independence, that I think people cottoned to up there in Chicago. And people like to see a counterweight up there between Springfield and Chicago. And I offered that. Paul Simon, I knew Paul Simon, and a good man, an honest man, but he was my opponent. And people down there in Southern Illinois said to me, I heard that first there, you know, Paul is going to kowtow to Daley when the chips are down. And that is right there, that sentence. Paul will kowtow to Daley when the chips are down. That's what enabled me to beat Paul Simon in the background of the walk. Can't tell you how many people I met on that walk who said that Paul Simon walked away from us and embraced Dick Daley. I walked to the people, not away from them.
And in the general election, you defeated Governor Richard Ogilvie.
Yes.
Many people will say that the income tax is what beat Richard Ogilvie. But if you look at the numbers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Richard Ogilvie did not do as well as expected in central Illinois. Is that a fair statement to say? And is that accurate? And it was really not, it could be interpreted that it was not the income tax that defeated Richard Ogilvie. It was other issues that central Illinois was most concerned with.
Bernie, they tell me that you teach state government, and I'm sure you do it capably. And that question you asked right there tells me that you do your homework. That's very accurate, extremely accurate. That's what, great part, caused Ogilvie to lose. Sure, people were unhappy about the income tax, but Ogilvie had also done some very good things for roads and et cetera in the state. And I came along again. He lost touch with the people, particularly downstate. I established a strong bond with those people downstate. And so the Democratic organization, yes, turned out some votes for me up in Chicago. But that bond that I established is what did it for me and what undid both Paul Simon and Ogilvy.
You came to Springfield in 1973. You brought a whole flock of brand new people to state government. How did you pick these people?
Well, some of them, Bertie, I met on the walk. I stayed every night with a different family, and I'll use one as an example. Sid Martyr. Sid was up in LaSalle, Peru, where he lived with his wife, Natalie, a wonderful lady, and they both still live right here in Springfield. I want to tell you, they're an admirable couple, and that woman, Natalie, is something else. I stayed at in their house on the walk and enjoyed it so much and got a feel for him. And so when I became governor, we got involved in a mess with energy during those years, and I said, you know, there's a guy out there that I met that has the right kind of a streak in him, the right kind of a head that I want on my team. So I called him up and asked him, will you come down here and get in charge of this energy situation? And he did, Sid did, and he took charge and he did a marvelous job. And there's another one who lives right here in Springfield, Mary Lee Leahy. Mary Lee, God bless her, has been with me from the very beginning. Now she's a Chicagoan. She's an independent Chicagoan. That lady has got independence built into her. She's determined, she's smart, and she did a grand job as running the Department of Children and Family Services. Mary Lee, great gal. My team, yes.
I want to talk a little bit about your relationship with the legislature. That seems to be such a contention today in state government, in Illinois state government. How did you get along with the legislative leaders? How did they perceive you? Was there any attempt to establish a rapport with them?
Yes, there was an attempt. It failed. They didn't like me. I was a new kid on the block. They knew a lot more about state government than I did, they thought, and maybe they did in some respects. But I said in my first speech to the state legislature, Bernie, let's have a partnership. And you can go back and read that. I said, let's work together to accomplish things, the governor and the legislature. I hadn't been in office 2 weeks, and I sent my cabinet nominees over there to the Senate. And one of those was that wonderful lady, Mary Lee Leahy. And to use the word that is used in the floor of the House and the Senate, they tubed them. They defeated them. Unheard of to have that many cabinet nominees kicked out by the leaders of the House and the Senate. And that was a combine, to use John Cass's word, of the Chicago Democrats and the Republicans. They teamed up and they sent those people down the drain. They declared war on me. Now, what are you going to do, Bernie, when somebody declares war on you? Are you going to lay down and roll over? I'm made that way. I am not made that way. And so I said, okay, you guys want to fight? Well, then let's fight.
Now, the President of the Senate was Bill Harris at the time, I believe, yes. And the Speaker of the House was Bob Blair. So you had a Republican legislature to start off with.
And then I changed that. I played a great part in changing that. In 1974, I went out there and campaigned hard, particularly downstate again, for my kind of people, and we won. We took control. The Democrats took control of both the House and the Senate. And you may remember that long fight over the speakership of the House.
Oh, yes.
And Daley put up Clyde Schote from deep southern Illinois. And Clyde, bless him, I just couldn't get along with Clyde. He was the old school wheel and deal. And I'm not a wheeler and dealer. Maybe I should have been more of a wheeler dealer, but you know, Bernie, I'm just not a wheeler and dealer. And so I said to Mayor Daley, the guy doesn't keep his promises. So one morning after 99 ballots, Mayor Daley called me early one morning. He said, "Gov," I was surprised. He'd never called me that before. He said, "You were right." And I said, "Right about what, Your Honor?" He said, "That guy doesn't keep his word. He promised that he could deliver some Republicans and get himself elected Speaker of the House. And he didn't keep his word. He didn't deliver them." So then he said to me, amazingly, he said, "Dan, who's our candidate?" And I said, "Bill Redmond." And he said, "Okay." And Bill Redmond became Speaker of the House.
And the Republicans, I think, were voting for Bud Washburn from Morris, Illinois, over and over. Was that he was the Republican leader, I think, at the time?
I believe so. I'm a little hazy on that part of it.
And Cecil Partee became.
Yes, I had a good personal relationship. Cecil particularly would say to me every now and then, "Dan, I wish I could help you, but I can't." And what, of course, he was referring to is the power of the Daley machine. He said, "I just can't do it. I wish I could help you more."
When you ran again, they beat you.
Lost.
What do you think, what would you attribute the loss to, do you think? The work of the machine, or were there other factors involved that...
Well, let me start out by saying, Bernie, that I was not a successful candidate. And I'm a great believer in personal responsibility. It happened on my watch. I take responsibility for it. I lost. I didn't do the job that I should have done. I'll add to that the fact that I carried 94 counties of the 106 in the state. 94 counties I carried. I carried downstate with 74% of the vote. 74% of the vote I carried downstate. I lost that election in Chicago. That's where I lost it. And Daley's precinct captains got their vote out. I didn't have a field organization. I did not get my vote out. Before the election, Bernie, the survey showed it was 53-47. I was ahead 53 to 47. If it had been a general election, I would have won, clearly, but it was a primary. My people didn't get out. I didn't get them out, so I take part of the blame for that. But that's what happened. But thank God, downstate stayed with me.
When you think about the 4 years that you served the state of Illinois, what would you think your major accomplishments, and what are you most regretful about just those 4 years?
The major accomplishment is standing tall on ethics. If I'm remembered for anything, I know I'm remembered for the walk, and I know I'm remembered for fighting Mayor Daley. But if I can be remembered for anything, it's ethics, for standing tall, as I said, for setting standards to the maximum extent that I could in state government to get the ethical standards raised, to stop pay-to-play politics. That's what I want to be remembered for.
If I may ask you just a bit of a personal question about the book and writing the book, more such the mechanics of writing a book. Obviously, with reflection now, and you're older than most people, I would imagine. You could say that. I think that's fair to say. And you take on this task of writing this book. What motivated you to write a book, and now? Why now?
Two things. Number one, towards the end of my life, I'm 85 years old now. I wanted my big family, and it is big. I have 22 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren. I wanted them to have a full-scale, correct account of what I was about with my life, what I was really trying to live for, and what I was trying to do as governor. They wouldn't have gotten that if I hadn't written that book. That was the first reason. The second reason was to try to have an impact, hopefully, continually on the state, on the need to change this rotten system. The Chicago Tribune calls it the endless corruption that besets Chicago and state government, endless corruption. And I wanted to bring that out, And sure, I wanted to show how I tried to stop it. I wanted to be remembered for trying to stop that correction and for trying to restore a balance in state government.
When you wrote, when did you write? What time of day did you find you?
Well, my best times are in the morning. I'm a morning person, and so I wrote in the morning. The most difficult decision in writing this book was this. My family did not want me to write about the prison experience. They wanted me to put in a paragraph and then forget about it. But I was persuaded by a very wonderful editor, Peggy Lang, to focus on the prison experience, that people would be able to relate to the parallels between that and the difficulties I was beset with as governor. And so I started, at her behest, I started each chapter with an account of something that happened in prison. And some of those are very distasteful, very hard to write about. And then to look into my soul, as I did in writing this book, where did I go wrong? What mistakes did I make? I must tell my family what mistakes I did and face up to them. Take my own inventory, as my father told me. Yes, spare my soul. And I wanted to do that, and I have done that. In these pages, you'll find it.
For our viewers that are not familiar with what happened, you pleaded guilty to a charge of, what was it, bank fraud? Was that the? And
that was the formal name of the principal count. I borrowed $49,000.
This is after you left the.
10 years after I left office. Had nothing to do with my being governor.
Right.
I borrowed $49,000 from a friend at a time when I could not borrow money from the SNL. So it was said that I did indirectly that which I could not do directly. Now there was a guy who did the same thing, and his name was Neil Bush, and he's a brother of the president. And his amount was not just $49,000, it was $3 million. And the United States Attorney in Denver asked the Department of Justice, I want to prosecute him for criminal offense. And the Attorney General of the United States held a press conference and said what he did was a violation of the regulations, but it was not a criminal act. In my case, the United States Attorney did not ask anybody. He said it is a criminal act, and so he went after me. Some will call it selective prosecution. A lot of people on the streets out there come up to me and call it political prosecution, because the United States Attorney was a political enemy of mine, a buddy. As a matter of fact, he was the personal lawyer for Jim Thompson, who made very clear his dislike for me. But be that as it may, I can't read people's minds, so I can't vouch for that. All I can say is that I did make a mistake, and I paid the price for making that mistake. And that's what I believe a man should do. If you do something wrong, and I did do something wrong, call it a regulation, call it a law, I was wrong. And I paid the price, and I bore it. And it's behind me now, but some people will not let it be behind me.
You were sentenced to 7 years, I believe?
I was sentenced to 7 years.
And you served 18 months?
I served 18 months. I'm told, and I don't know, that story is in this book, I'm told that a group of former judges and businessmen, most of them black people, went to this judge, who was a black lady, and said, enough is enough. Why don't you do something about this? And she relented, and she reduced my sentence to time served, it's called, which was 18 months that I went free.
I think for someone reading the book, the positive thing is that you have this very illustrious career, very admirable career, and then there's this bid where it's probably the highest of the highs and perhaps the lowest of the lows. Yes. And you've survived the whole journey. And there could be some insight in reliving that journey with you, and I think that's perhaps the value of that book. Would you agree with that, or?
Well, yeah, I think so, because it was a roller coaster life, and I think people, since I've tried to be so honest about it, it wouldn't have been a good book if I hadn't been honest, and I am honest about my successes and my failures, laid it on the line. And I hope that people will also enjoy reading it and get something out of it at the same time.
How do you feel about it? How do you feel about the last 85 years? If you had to score yourself, how would you rate yourself for 85 years?
I add it all up. It's all summed up. My feelings inside of myself.
Right.
And what that guy said when I got on the elevator this morning, that really, really socked it to me in terms of my feelings when he said, "We need you back here, Dan." That was the highest point in my life. And to have people, after all these years, say that, that makes me feel that it was all worthwhile.
The name of the book is The Maverick and the Machine.
The Maverick and the Machine, and boy, I am a maverick.
Governor Walker, it has certainly been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. If you have any comments or questions on our programming, please email us at illinoischannel@aol.com. Or if you have any questions about the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.